Welcome to the video solutions for the Edexcel Functional Skills English Level 2 Writing Practice Paper 1. In this video we will go through the questions and you can get a better idea of what you want your answers to look like, as well as what to look out for when planning your answers. Before we take a look at some model answers, let's go through the marking criteria to see what you will be assessed on. So you'll be assessed on punctuating correctly, using a wide range of punctuation for effect, using correct grammar, so ensuring that all of your writing makes sense and all of your sentences make sense on their own. Spelling words used in work, study and daily life correctly, as well as a range of specialist words. So your spelling will need to be spot on during the exam. And then we've got communicating information, ideas and opinions clearly, coherently and effectively. So making sure that any information, ideas and opinions that you've included in your answer are very clear and easy for the reader to understand. Writing text of an appropriate level of detail and appropriate length. So if the question has a word count, you are meeting the appropriate length for that word count, and you are including appropriate details according to what the question has asked for. Organising your writing for different purposes using appropriate formatting and structure. So using a good range of organisational features that are appropriate for the text type that you've been asked to write. Convey clear meaning and establish cohesion using organisational markers effectively. So that means sort of linking your sentences and paragraphs together so that they are cohesive, they all make sense together as one piece. Use different language and register, such as persuasive techniques, supporting evidence and specialist words that are suited to audience and purpose. So this means that you need to focus on the audience given in the question and the purpose given in the question, and make sure that your writing is appropriate for the audience and purpose. And finally, construct complex sentences consistently and accurately using paragraphs where appropriate. So you need to make sure that you are using longer, more complex sentences, and you must always use paragraphs. So let's have a look at the first question. Task 1. Every year, people can apply to career grants for funding to help develop their careers. The most deserving person will receive £5,000. This can be used to pay for courses, equipment, visits, or other expenses. To apply, write a letter to Laura Mensa, Career Grants, 1 New Road, Hanton, HN1 7BU. So your task is to write a letter to Laura Mensa to apply for the funding. In your letter, you should describe what you're doing now and your career ambitions, explain in detail how you would use the money, and persuade Laura Mensa that you deserve the funding. You should aim to write about 250 to 300 words. So let's break this question down and think about what we might want to write about. So this box here is really good for giving us some context. So we're applying for a career grant. So we're looking to receive some funding, and this funding will be used to pay for courses, equipment, visits or other expenses. So we need to write a letter, that's the text type or form that we're going to use, and our audience is Laura Mensa at the Career Grants team. In our letter we need to describe what we're doing now. So what, in terms of our career, are we doing? Are we doing any courses at the moment? Are we going on educational visits? What kind of work experience are we getting? And what are our career ambitions? So what do we want to do in the future? Explain in detail how you would use the money. So we know that the money can be used to pay for courses, equipment, visits or other expenses. So if you wanted to become sort of a person that looks after horses, then you might be asking for the equipment that's necessary to do that, or a course that will help you to do that, and maybe visit a riding centre or something. So, and then finally we've got to persuade Laura Mensa that you deserve the funding. So we want to be using persuasive techniques throughout our writing here. And because we are applying for a career grant, that's quite a professional thing to do. We want to be using formal language throughout. And finally, we've been told here that we need to try to write 250 to 300 words overall. So try to make sure that you stay roughly within that word count. So now let's have a read through an example answer for this question. So we've got John Smithy, 12 Birchett Road, Leeds, and Laura Mensa, Career Grants, 1 New Road, Hanton, and then we've got the date as well. Dear Miss Mensa, I am writing to apply for the career grant of £5,000. As a part-time primary teaching assistant studying to become a full-time teacher, I aspire to become the head teacher of my own school. Education has always been a great passion of mine, meaning I'm very keen to develop my future career further, something that will only be achievable with your help. The money will only go towards things that will benefit my career, including transport to and from my placement, buying specialist equipment for the classroom and more creative teaching resources. Specialist equipment is a vital part of any classroom. Children with attention difficulties have been shown to achieve a 30% higher score overall when given fiddle-based toys whilst learning to a lesson. This fact is one that I would enforce in order to make education a more positive and productive environment. I can't think of a more worthy candidate to receive the funding. Helping students to get higher grades overall will lead to even more substantial career growth and better opportunities for myself. Depriving me of this chance would be like depriving these children of a future. Furthermore, I deserve this funding because working part-time has been a struggle financially. Young teaching students like myself work incredibly hard on placements, but balancing the gigantic workload of a degree at the same time is difficult at best. I believe my hard-working attitude, passion for my subject and motivation to achieve highly are the core reasons behind my deserving of this grant. Yours sincerely, John Smithy. So now let's take a look at why this is a good answer, and we'll start with the punctuation. So the punctuation is mostly correct in this answer. We have a capital letter at the start of every sentence and a full stop at the end to show where the sentences start and end. We've also got capitalisation of the word I. Whenever you use I as a word, it must be capitalised. And we have capital letters for proper nouns. So, for example, we've got Ms. Mensa. Ms. is a title and Mensa is a surname, so that needs capital letters. And we've also got career grants, that's the name of an organisation, so that's capitalised too, and also place names like Hanton. So we've got really great use of capital letters and full stops throughout the answer, and we've also got an effective use of commas. So commas have been used to separate different clauses within sentences and add pieces of information. They can also be used to create lists. So for example, we've got the money will only go toward things that will benefit my career, and then we've got a comma to include some more information, followed by some commas used in a list. So transport to and from my placement, comma, buying specialist equipment for the classroom. So try to use commas in your answer to add additional information and to ensure that you are breaking up parts of your sentences. We also have other pieces of punctuation. So for example, we have some hyphens that have been used to create a singular word out of two words. So for example, part and time individually have different meanings, but when they're put together, they create a new word with a new meaning. We've also got parentheses that have been used correctly here to add some additional information. So the transport is to and from the placement, and it just adds that little bit of information to the sentence. We have a percentage sign that's been used to give a statistic, which is really effective as well. However, we do have some pieces of punctuation that have been used incorrectly in this answer. So for example, here we have a semicolon, and this has been used incorrectly. So we know that this is incorrect because a semicolon is used whenever you want to draw two sentences that are linked together into one sentence. But in this sentence, this second clause here is needed. So we've got, as a part-time primary teaching assistant studying to become a full-time teacher, that wouldn't make sense on its own. So we need to use a comma to add more information rather than a semicolon. If that did make sense on its own, if they said, I am a part-time primary teaching assistant studying to become a full-time teacher, then it would be relevant to use a semicolon. If you're not sure how to use a piece of punctuation, don't be including it in your answers because you might lose marks. We also have the incorrect use of a colon here. So because we have the word including before the list, we don't need the colon there, and it's incorrect to use it there. So if you're using such as or including before a list, then make sure that you're not using a colon. You only need a colon when you want to start a list without using one of these words. So overall, the use of punctuation is generally quite good, and the student would get quite high marks for this answer, but they have tried to be a little bit too ambitious, and they've tried to use pieces of punctuation that they're not quite sure how to use. So make sure that you're not doing that in your answers. Next, let's think about the grammar and spelling. So for grammar to be correct, your sentences need to be accurate and they need to make sense on their own. Often the best way to make sure that you do this is to imagine someone reading the answer out loud and seeing if it makes sense. And this answer, we've read it all out loud and all of it makes sense together. All of the spelling is also correct. So we've got some tricky words included as well, some more difficult words to spell. So for example, achievable there. And we've got specialist equipment. These are quite tricky words to spell. So if you can try and include some specialist words that might be a little bit more difficult, and always check your answers to ensure that all your spelling is correct. If you don't know how to spell a word, it's always a good idea to think about another word that means the same thing that you could use instead. So now we've spoken about punctuation, grammar and spelling. And if we have a quick look at the mark scheme, we can see that those 3 points, punctuation, grammar and spelling, altogether make up 42% of your marks. So that's nearly half of your marks overall. So you really need to be making sure that you know how to use correct grammar, you can spell words correctly, and you're using punctuation accurately and consistently. Next, we're going to think about the other criteria that you'll be assessed on. So these ones here, which altogether make up the composition of the writing. So in order to gain high marks, your answer will have to be very clear and make sense when you're reading it out loud. So good spelling, punctuation and grammar will help to make your meaning clear, and trying to imagine that you're reading it for the first time, seeing if you would understand everything in the answer. That would also help you to make sure that your writing is clear. As well as being clear, your writing will have to be detailed and an appropriate length. It can be tricky to see how long your answers should be, but sometimes in the question we'll have a bit of an indication. So here it says 250 to 300 words, and this answer meets that word count effectively. It doesn't just matter how long your answer is, it also matters how detailed it is and whether the details that have been used are appropriate for the question. So this answer uses appropriate detail because it's addressing all of the bullet points that were given in the question. So the first one, describe what you were doing now and your career ambitions. They've described what they're doing at the moment. They are a part-time primary teaching assistant and they aspire to become the head teacher if they're in school. So what they want to do in the future has been mentioned as well. So they've ticked that first bullet point. Explain in detail how you would use the money. So they've explained in this paragraph here that the money will be used for transport, it will be used for specialist equipment, and they've gone into some detail explaining why they think this specialist equipment will be needed and what kind of specialist equipment they want to use the grant to fund. So fiddle-based toys, for example. And then persuade Laura Mensa that you deserve the funding. They've used quite a few persuasive words and techniques. They've said that I deserve the funding, and then they've given reasons why. Working part-time has been a struggle, so inviting some sympathy from the reader there. And then young teaching students work incredibly hard on placements, so saying incredibly hard worker is a persuasive way to try and convince Laura that we're going to be using this funding effectively. They're going to work hard. So overall, they have definitely considered all of the bullet points, and the details that they've included are very much focused on the question. So to add some detail, you can create sort of a spider mind map to plan your answer before you start. That will help you to generate a range of ideas that are relevant to the question. And just make sure that you're not including any details that might be irrelevant to the question. So don't veer off in a direction that deviates from what the question is asking. Make sure that you are focusing on the question throughout. Another important aspect that you'll need to consider is organisation and formatting. So whenever you are told to write a text, you will be given a text type to write. Let's remind ourselves of the text type for this question. We are writing a letter. So you need to familiarise yourself with all of the different elements that you'll need in a letter before the exam. And this student has done this reasonably well. So they have the sender's address up here, and then they've got the recipient's address down here. They've also included a date, which is really important. However, the date should be over here under the sender's address rather than under the recipient's address. So just make sure that you are familiarising yourself with that layout at the top of a letter. You'll also need a polite greeting, so Dear Miss Mensa here, and then you'll need a polite sign-off as well. Here the student has used yours sincerely because we know the name of the person that we're writing to. We know that her name is Laura Mensa. If we didn't know the name of the person, then we could write Dear Sir / Madam, and then we would put yours faithfully rather than sincerely. And then right at the end, you will need to include the name of the sender. Make sure that you're also using paragraphs throughout every single answer that you write. This will divide up your answer and make it really clear and easy for the reader to understand. As well as being organised effectively, your answers will need to be cohesive. So that essentially means that everything has a clear meaning and everything is linked together effectively. So you can use organisational markers, otherwise known as connectives or conjunctives, such as and, but, or so, to link your sentences together and join up your ideas so that they flow effectively and are easy to read. So in this answer, we've got sentences that flow on from one another and they're all linked together. So in each paragraph, all of the sentences should be focused on the same thing. So for example, paragraph 2 is all about what the money will be spent on, and sentences 1 and 2 are linked because they are both mentioning specialist equipment. So they have really effectively linked those two sentences together. They're talking about the same thing in that paragraph. And then the third sentence follows on from that because they're referring to a fact that has been given in the previous sentence. So this fact, they're referring to the statistic that they've just given in the previous sentence there. So all of it flows really effectively. All of the sentences link up together. We've also got lots of connective words used to join ideas together. So, for example, in this final paragraph, we've got furthermore to start with to link the paragraph to what we've said in the previous paragraphs. Then we also have a use of because here to sort of link ideas together to give reasons why the person deserves the funding. And then finally, we have but to sort of create a contrast saying that they're working really hard, however, it's really difficult for them. So overall, the answer is really well joined up, it's very cohesive, and it would get high marks. We also need to think about the kind of language and register that we're using. So your writing has to have the right kind of tone and style to match the reader and the purpose. So in this answer, the language is quite formal. For example, we've got phrases like make education a more positive and productive environment. That's a particularly sophisticated phrase, it's very formal, and the answer doesn't include any slang words or any contractions. So no uses of words like can't or won't. They would use cannot or will not instead, which is much more formal. So remember that whenever you're writing for a professional audience, someone that you don't know, for example, you definitely want to be using formal language throughout. We also have language that fits the topic of the question. So the answer is very much focused on the career grant, and they're explaining reasons why they should get this career grant throughout. So it's very much suited to the purpose that we've been given in the question there. We're applying for the funding. Now let's look at how this answer uses longer sentences to connect different ideas together. Now you'll need to use some long sentences in your answers to show the examiner that you can connect your ideas together. So for example, we have the money will only go towards things that will benefit my career, including. So we've got a comma there, and then we've used the word including to follow on in this sentence. We've also got a colon, but remember that that is incorrect. We don't need that there if we've got the word including. So including transport, and then we've added even more information using parentheses to and from my placement. And then we've added another idea, buying specialist equipment for the classroom, and then we have a connective to add a final idea and more creative teaching resources. So there's lots of different elements to that sentence. They've explained what the money will go towards, that it will benefit their career, and they've given lots of examples of what the money will be used for, as well as giving a bit more detail about what the transport will be used for. So try your best to figure out how to sort of connect your ideas together within sentences so that you can have some longer, more complicated sentences that will impress the examiner. So overall, we can see that this answer is effective for a number of reasons. To start with, it has definitely answered the question. We've got each bullet point being addressed, and the audience and purpose have been taken into account. It's been written to apply for the funding, it's been appropriately written to Laura Mensa, and because we're applying for funding, it's been written in a formal style. The answer all makes sense and it flows effectively. We've got paragraphs flowing on from each other and every sentence flows on from each other as well. The formatting is correct for a letter. We've got the use of addresses, we have the date there, and then we've got a formal greeting and sign off. We've also got accurate spelling and the correct use of a range of punctuation throughout the answer. Finally, the writing is appropriate for the audience and purpose specified. That's really, really important so that your answers are tailored effectively to the question. So if you've written an answer to this question already, you can use this as inspiration to try and improve your answer. And if you haven't written an answer already, then you can use this as a kind of template to give you some ideas for how you could answer this question, and you can have a go at answering it yourself. Now let's take a look at the second task. So the information that we've been given here, we've been given an email about a day out. So, hi, we want to organise a day out for people in our organisation. Our aim is to bring everyone together. In past years, we've been to the seaside, a theme park, and a shopping centre. We want your ideas for where we should go this year. Try to think of places to go that won't be too expensive and that people with different interests will enjoy. Lee. So your task is to write an email to Lee about your ideas for a day out. And in your email, you should give your ideas for a day out and explain why these would work well. You should aim to write about 200 to 250 words. So here, the text type that we're writing is an email. So we're going to use formatting features that are appropriate to that. And we have an example email here that's going to help us with that. We're writing to Lee. We know that Lee is someone from our organisation. It says organisation.biz. We're from the same organisation there. And we want to be giving ideas for a day out and explaining why these would work well. So Lee specified that we're trying to think of places that won't be too expensive. So we won't be going to a fancy restaurant and paying tons of money for food, for example, and that people with different interests will enjoy. So we need to think about activities that will encompass lots of different interests there. So we need to use the context in the question to come up with some ideas. And we need to write 200 to 250 words. So try to stay within that word count roughly, and your answer will be appropriate. So let's have a read of the example answer here. Hi Lee, I hope all is well. I was thinking we should all go to the local museum and art gallery for our next staff day out. It's great fun and is more interactive than your typical museum. It is perfect for everyone as it doesn't require any particular skill and is very accessible. I've attached a link to the affordable ticket prices with group discounts when you pre-book online. As we've all had such a stressful time lately, I think that this activity in a relaxing environment would bring us all together whilst keeping our brains active. Looking at different art styles such as abstraction has been known to increase critical thinking skills as well as creativity. This means it would not only benefit personal health but increase organisation success as a result. After the guided tour, the opportunity to create your own artwork would definitely get votes from the design team. Sharing ideas and inspiration would definitely increase teamwork skills. As we've already done the seaside, a shopping centre and a theme park, why not make the staff outing something most people haven't done before? I think the team would respect you even more for pushing people out of their artistic comfort zone by organising a trip that is new and exciting. Additionally, we can keep a product of our creative choices to make it a more memorable day. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, John. So how does this answer meet the marking criteria? Well, let's start with punctuation. The answer uses correct capital letters and full stops throughout. So at the start of every sentence, we will need a capital letter, and at the end of every sentence, we will need a full stop or an exclamation mark or question mark, depending on whether we are just having a normal sentence, an exclamative sentence, or an interrogative sentence asking a question. We also have capital letters for proper nouns such as Lee, that's a name, and John as well. Other punctuation that we've got commas in there to sort of build on ideas. So for example, as we've all had such a stressful time recently, so that's one idea, that the team has been having a stressful time, and then they've connected this using a comma to their opinion that the activity would bring them together. And they've also added that they will also keep their brains active. So using commas to add information and ideas there. As well as commas, we have exclamation marks throughout. These sort of build the excitement in the writing and create an excited tone and establish sort of an informal style, because we know Lee quite well. He sent us quite an informal email saying won't be too expensive, using a contraction there, won't rather than will not. So in response, we need to use that similar informal style. We've also got a rhetorical question near the end to try and create a positive and persuasive style. So why not make the staff outing something most people haven't done before, encouraging the reader, Lee, to agree with our idea. As well as using punctuation effectively and using a range of punctuation, we need to make sure that grammar and spelling is correct throughout our answers. So for it to make sense grammatically, your sentences will need to be accurate and they all need to make sense on their own. The best way to do this might be to try and imagine yourself reading your answer out loud, just to make sure that it all makes sense. And then maybe when you're practicing your answers before your exam, you could get someone else to read through it and see if it makes sense to them. As well as grammar, we need to consider spelling. So all of the spelling in this answer is correct, and it has included some quite difficult to spell words, for example, interactive, particular and accessible, and affordable as well. So try to use a few longer words that might be a bit trickier to spell, but make sure that you are only trying to spell words that you know how to spell correctly, because the more words that you spell incorrectly, the less clear that your answer will be and the fewer marks you'll get. So make sure that you practice your spelling well before your exam and make sure that you're comfortable with spelling simple and complex words. You also need to make sure that your grammar is correct, and the best way to do that is just practice, 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 and make sure that you know how to use lots of different types of punctuation effectively. So now we've covered spelling, punctuation and grammar, which are 42% of your marks overall. Now we'll look at the composition of the answer, so all of the different parts that make the answer clear and easy for the reader to understand. So the first point that we need to consider is clarity, making sure that all your writing makes sense. We know that this writing makes sense because we've read it out loud and everything was crystal clear, easy for the reader to understand. We also need to consider how detailed and how long our answer is. So the question has specified that we need to write 200 to 250 words. This answer has 278 words overall, 238 words, sorry, so we have fit within that word count. So practicing questions will give you a good idea of what 200 to 250 words looks like. That will mean that you don't have to waste time counting up words in your exam. Detail is also really important to consider. So your detail that you include needs to be appropriate and address the points in the question. So this answer addresses all of the bullet points that have been given here. So we've given our ideas for a day out and explained why these would work well. So the idea for a day out is to go to the local museum and art gallery, and then they've gone into a bit more detail about what they can do there, looking at different art styles, for example, and also having the opportunity to create their own artwork. And then they've explained why these ideas would work well. It would get votes from the design team to create artwork, and sharing ideas and inspiration would increase teamwork skills. And they've got lots more explanation in there, lots more details about why they think a museum and art gallery is an appropriate place to go. So make sure that any details that you include are really fitting with the question appropriately. Don't veer off and go in a different direction, start talking about something that's irrelevant. The best way to come up with ideas if you're struggling is to create a sort of mind map before you start writing. That will help you to come up with tons of ideas and then link them together before you start writing your answer. As well as being detailed, your answers will have to be appropriately formatted and organised. So you'll have to use the correct organisational features based on the text type given in the question. So in the question, we've been told that our text type is an email, and we've got an example of an email here. So we've got an idea of the things that we need to include. So we have to, from, and a subject line. So for your subject line, you basically want to summarise what the email's about in just a few words. So in this case, we've got day out as the subject. We also need to include a greeting and finally a sign off with the name. So in our answer, we have the to and from, we've got the subject line, we have the address to the reader, the greeting, and we have the sign off there. And we've got an appropriate little line at the end just to add to that sign off. So altogether, we have used all of the appropriate features for an email. We've also got paragraphs used throughout the answer. You need to make sure that you're using paragraphs in every answer so that it has a clear structure. So every time you introduce a new idea or a topic, you should be using a new paragraph. And the bullet points in the question can often give you an idea of what each paragraph should be about. So your ideas for a day out could be one paragraph, and then your explanation could be another one. In this answer, those bullet points have kind of been merged together throughout the answer, but each paragraph is about something slightly different. So in the first one, they've been introducing their idea to go to the museum, and they've mentioned that it is accessible and affordable. Then they move on and explain what they could do there and the skills that they could develop there. And then finally, they are saying what they've done in the past and how this trip is new, exciting, and different. So each paragraph is talking about something different, but all of them are relevant to the question, and it's a really effective structure which works alongside the organisational features to make the email clear and easy to read. You also need to be making sure that your answers are all cohesive. So that means that everything links together, everything flows together appropriately, and you're focusing on the topic specified in the question. So this answer is particularly cohesive. How do we know this? Well, in each paragraph, all of the sentences are about the same thing. And we have a really effective structure that flows on from one another. So we've got the first paragraph introducing where they should go and explaining the benefits of it in the second paragraph, and then finally showing how the trip is unique to make overall an effective and persuasive answer that flows on from where each paragraph flows on from one another and each sentence flows as well. So for example, in this last paragraph, we've got, as we have already done the seaside, a shopping centre and a theme park, why not make the staff outing something most people haven't done before? So they're proposing this question, saying, why don't we do this? And then they're giving their opinions to follow on from that. So I think the team would respect you for pushing people out of their comfort zone. So they haven't done it before. We're linking that to pushing people out of their comfort zone. We're creating a new and exciting trip. And then we follow on from this effectively by using this connective word here, additionally. It's really great to try to use connective words in your answer, organisational markers, to organise your answer effectively. So additionally, we can keep a product of our creative choices to make it a memorable day. So we've got all of it linked up there, creative linking to the artistic comfort zone mentioned in the previous sentence there. As well as thinking about how to structure and organise our writing, we need to make sure that the language we are using is appropriate for the question, appropriate for the purpose and audience. So if we have a quick look at the question, we can see that we're focusing on Lee as our audience, and we are giving ideas for a day out as the purpose. So this answer is focused on giving the idea for a day out throughout. It's correctly addressed to Lee as well. We've also got to consider the context that we've been given in the question. So we know that we know Lee quite well and that we can address him quite informally. And the reason we know this is in his email, he's used this contraction, won't, which is quite informal, instead of will not, which would be more formal. So we've used contractions as well. We've got we've used there. And we know that we're part of an organisation with Lee because it says our organisation. So we've focused on the word we throughout and our next staff day out. So it's clear that the writer is part of the organisation. Finally, we need to explain why the day would work well, so why the visit to the museum is going to be effective, which means we're going to have to persuade. So we're trying to persuade Lee to accept our ideas. So in the first paragraph, we have used some emotive language here. We've got it's great fun, and we've also got make it a memorable day, so some more kind of emotive language being used. And this is to persuade Lee. We've also got some colloquial sort of slang phrases, like great fun, for example, just to ensure that we are being correctly quite informal. As well as using appropriate language, we need to try to use complex sentences in our answers. So these are sentences that have multiple different parts, lots of different ideas that are connected by commas or other punctuation, or perhaps connectives. So, for example, in this answer, we've got, as we've all had such a stressful time recently, I think this activity in a relaxing environment will bring us all together whilst keeping our brains active. So here we said how the commas join lots of different ideas together, making the sentence a lot more complex and linking ideas effectively. So overall, this answer effectively answers the question because we've addressed each point and we've considered the context, the audience, and the purpose. The answer all makes sense and it flows effectively, and the correct sort of formatting has been used. So we've got the from, to, and subject line that we need for an email, we've got the greeting, and we've got the sign off. The spelling is accurate throughout, and we've got the correct use of a range of punctuation. So for example, we have commas, we have capital letters and full stops, we've got apostrophes used for contractions, we've got all kinds of punctuation used effectively, and the answer is grammatically correct. So overall, this is a really effective answer, and you can use this as a sort of template to generate ideas for your own answer.